Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the QRL Show, the place where you come for the crypto and stay for the quantum. On today's episode, my co-host Michael Strike and I are joined by Dr. Joseph Kearney for an exciting episode. Joseph is a post-quantum cryptography expert, blockchain researcher, previous research associate at the University of Kent in the UK. He brings almost a decade of experience plus of experience that's at the crossroads of crypto, cryptography, blockchain, and quantum technologies, with a specific and deep focus on understanding, mitigating risk that quantum computing poses to cryptographic systems, and it's very specific to blockchain networks in particular. So this conversation is going to be right up our alley, up our audience's alley. And for those watching, if you watch to the end, what you're going to hopefully take away is get a better understanding of the quantum threat specific to blockchain, understanding the constraints that a lot of the post-quantum projects face, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, you name it, and hopefully by the end of this episode, asking some better questions along with having a better understanding. So for those viewing, this is Joseph's second appearance on the QRL Show. His first appearance on our post-quantum panel happened nearly a year ago, and we had Joseph, Dr. Carlos Perez Delgado, and Jamie Pont, who were his collaborators on their paper that was titled Downtime Required for Bitcoin Quantum Safety, which resonated really well with our audience and those in the industry. So without further ado, I'll let my guest and Joseph and Michael introduce themselves, and we'll jump into this full-ranging conversation. Joseph, good to have you with us.
Great to be back on the show. I'm Dr. Joseph Kearney. Ryan gave an incredible introduction for myself, but my PhD was in looking at post-quantum blockchain technologies, the vulnerabilities, and how you can use quantum devices in conjunction with blockchain technology. Over the last 8 years, I've been working on this area, and the last year, everything's got a lot more fast-paced as far as quantum computing and blockchains goes. So glad to be here.
Perfect. Well, we're going to get into it in a few minutes. Michael, tied to that, before we jump into some of the range of questions, can you give a brief intro on yourself? I know those that watch your channel are familiar, but yourself and what we're about with QRL here.
My classical career is what I call it as a network engineer, route switch, firewall, and IT. A lot of Cisco, Palo Alto, Juniper firewalls, switches at the corporate infrastructure level, both in design and operations. So that's my classical. I did that for about 25 years. My non-classical career, I find myself here at the quantum resistant ledger today, and I think this career is much more interesting. I've been on the team for about, what is it, Ryan, 6 years now?
Plus years. We've going on 5-6 years of just strictly on content at this intersection, so a little bit longer than that.
So in that time, I've gone down the two very deep rabbit holes of what blockchain and quantum computing, where those rabbit holes intersect. I've been in the space a long time. I started mining Bitcoin in 2013 and knew about it before that. And just like everybody else, took profits along the way. I'm not a millionaire. So there's always that. Only if I would, you wouldn't have. You would have sold on the way up, just like everybody else.
You would have lost in Mount Gox. You would have, you would have bought your lunch. You would have bought a Fedora hat like Strike with it.
So essentially, I have two careers. My background is engineering, and I put together relatable and hopefully meaningful content here for the QRL.
Yeah, no. So with that, with Joseph's background, with your background, I think that lends us into a really fun conversation today. I think it would be nice to start out. We pulled together some different questions. Michael, I think, how about you kick us off with the first one, and then we can kind of jump around to some of the others. I think we have a number of good questions that are all tied to quantum threat to some extent, Bitcoin, where the puck is going. So Michael, kick us off with the first one, and then we'll just continue in opening up from there.
So let's not jump quite into the quantum area yet. Let's talk about a broader audience here, and let's just talk about Bitcoin for a second. I'll let you start, Joseph. What's some of your opinions on what the greatest threats to Bitcoin that exist today are?
I think one of the major threats to Bitcoin is the pull in two different directions. You've got the developers, you've got the core devs who want to maintain this um, decentralized network, but then on the other side, you've got the fact that you've got ETFs, you've got BlackRock, you've got Michael Saylor, you've got these people pulling it into a more traditional finance aspect. And at the moment, though, that world is coexisting quite well, I feel, to some extent. But there is going to be situations where upgrades are wanted by the industry side that the core devs are not going to be willing to do. And I feel that would I go as far to say that could cause some kind of hard fork? Potentially, it could if there's some kind of major issue that is threatening Bitcoin. I know we agreed not to talk about quantum, but whether that's quantum or something else, that issue of the ossification of the development of Bitcoin, it's by nature quite slow to upgrade, and I feel that that doesn't always lend itself with the industry side of things. So I feel that's probably going to be one of the more interesting things, how Bitcoin, whether Bitcoin development actually changes over the next 5-10 years, and if it doesn't, potentially that could be a threat to it. I don't know what you think, Michael, but it's
Yeah, well, I'm curious to this as well. Coming off of Joseph's answer, what's I know there's a couple big ones,
You,
but what's
you
what?
said a few things that
Yeah.
echoed my thoughts. First of all, ETFs. Yeah, great. Let's do the same thing to Bitcoin that we did with gold. Paper it over, take it off chain until nobody knows what the heck its value is, right? So there's no guarantee that if you're have an ETF that they necessarily have it backed, right? They may say that they do, but who the heck knows? I think that's a risk. I think that wasn't probably an unavoidable risk, merging blockchain finance and TradFi into some sort of, not even going to call it a cohesive whole, but into something. We'll leave the audience up to decide what something means. Some of the other concerns I have are besides the quantum one. We'll get into that. I have some concerns over the development process, the amount of the smaller number of devs that have the reputation and have the authority to approve or to essentially gatekeep changes to Bitcoin seems smaller than what I would like to see, because that opens the door, I think, to coercion or some type of manipulation. I think that's a risk point. Having a small set of people a smaller set of people that control what gets merged. Another risk point. Now that we've gotten to scale, right? That everyone knows what Bitcoin is, right? Now that we've gotten to scale in Bitcoin, there's a whole bunch of people that have Bitcoin and no idea how it works. So there's so much. There's so much noise on Twitter of just people talking, just people confusing other people into this delusional echo feedback chamber. For example, oh, it's the Bitcoin. They'll just upgrade the code to make it quantum. It's just a software change. It's just like Y2K. It's not like Y2K. I was there. I'm that old. Y2K had a known set time that it was going to fail. Quantum computers, you won't even know that they're there. Y2K bugs were detectable, right? And with quantum computing, you won't even the signatures are cryptographically indistinguishable from other users. Y2K was public. CRQCs, or cryptographically relevant quantum computers, are largely classified, and there's just a whole bunch of reasons, and it comes down to socially how we're communicating to each other which comes down to a lot of interesting questions. I think about human nature and wanting to be the smartest person in the room, or wanting to be the loudest, or wanting to incentives being the most number of clicks equals success. There's the monetary angle, and you have all of these competing agendas or priorities, if you will, that are obfuscating the real ethos and philosophy of what Bitcoin is. And to be honest, if I was new to blockchain, and I went online and I tried to do research online, and I was trying to learn how it worked, I'd have no idea where to start. Just the opinions alone and the misinformation and or disinformation would be very confusing. So those are some of the problems I see with Bitcoin. I don't see them changing anytime soon. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think just to give an added take, I think similar sentiment here. I think it's more just the fact that, like you guys both mentioned, there's a number of players in the decision making of the direction of whether it's some of the OG Bitcoin developers of, hey, one thinks this, one thinks that, but the reality is that if they're going to have different ideas, different incentives of what they want. And you guys ever see the drawing of when you have a team consensus and you're trying to draw a horse, and then you wait too long, everybody's got a different idea, and then you look at the drawing at the end and it's an ugly camel. So it's like, I feel like we might end up getting something like that, where it's going to be a little bit too late. There's no perfect solution, and there's just constraints based on the understanding of how the blockchain has been since the very beginning. It's not post-quantum. So yeah.
People have to remember this was a socioeconomic experiment, and it's a very long-running experiment. Maybe 2013 to 2017, I was probably 2008. For about 5 years, 2013 to 2018, I was probably a Bitcoin maximalist. 2018 to maybe 2022, I was a altcoin enthusiast. And here in 2026, I have some serious concerns about the future of blockchain technology, which we will probably be talking about on this episode.
I want to jump into get Joseph your take, and then Strike as well on this next one, which is since we're specifically talking about Bitcoin right now, what's a belief, or what's one Bitcoin belief that you see online or in circles that's often or widely repeated, but you think is either wrong or outdated? I think this is a good question. There might be a few, but what's one of these big ones that you see it repeated all the time, and you're like, hey, either that's old or it's wrong altogether?
I think both me and Michael are going to agree on this one, because we've both written about it on Twitter. That's our X.
I'm going to try not to see.
The bank pin analogy is one that really is one that I found irritating. I wrote a blog post. Obviously, Mike, you wrote a bit of an article on it. The argument being that why would anybody target Bitcoin when you can target the entire financial industry? And it's your bank pin is only 4 digits long, and why would I not use a quantum computer to break into Elon Musk's bank account instead of attacking Bitcoin? And it's I can see from I don't want to call it a naive perspective, but from someone that isn't day-to-day involved with any kind of quantum computing or post-quantum cryptography, why that would be intuitive to some extent. But I think the main reasoning that it just plain isn't, in the fact that, first of all, just to kick things off, I know for a fact, I mean, there's quite a few people out there that I've spoken to at major banks. They are already putting into place post-quantum resistance. They are some banks looking at it to have post-quantum resistance by 2030. The rest won't be far after that. They have a responsibility to their customers to make sure that this isn't something that could happen. Secondly, is that Bitcoin, the keys are on the blockchain. You can see them. You can go and see Satoshi's public key because it was paid it was paid to his public key, some of the early mining rewards, rather than paid to the hash of the public key. You can go and search the top 100 wallets, and I think it was a analysis done by Project 11, who I formerly worked for, where they looked at how many of these wallets have actually sent transactions, and therefore the public key is accessible. And it's something in the region of 30-odd%. It's hundreds of billions of dollars worth of value that is protected by a public key. The private key is protected by the public key, and that's all well and good in a classical world, but in a quantum world, with how rapidly quantum computing progress is happening, that is becoming less and less secure. Meanwhile, with your bank account, does anybody know? You don't know what your public key for your bank account is, and solving a 4-digit PIN with any kind of modern day computer really isn't that hard. It's but the banks have fail safes for that exact reason. But that's my main thought. That's one thing that does entertain me every time I see it, and it's probably one of the main misnomers, particularly about post-quantum computing at the moment.
Michael, wanted to add there on a belief,
sure.
that Bitcoin belief widely repeated. Yeah,
I do remember that Twitter post now that it was brought up. I think one of the biggest misconceptions essentially comes down to a cognitive recency bias. And what I mean by that is a state of thinking in a Boolean way that Bitcoin is impenetrable. And it is a secure network. I would argue it's a very secure network, but a lot of people don't realize that the technology that underlines transactions on Bitcoin goes back to the 1970s, the late 1970s and the early 80s, when asymmetric encryption was created, which ECDSA is a derivative of, which is SECP 256K1. I think I got it right. Which is the set of parameters that are used under ECDSA. All of this stuff goes back to all this really goes back to the 1970s. And Shor's algorithm wasn't even considered until the early 90s. So we are running on decades and decades of assumptions on mathematical primitives that we're starting to approach, in my opinion, a gray area. So there's a lot of quantum talk, obviously now, but I think how I would answer the question is, right now the recency bias, people think that it's always been this way. I know that everyone says that it's the strongest, it's the strongest network available, but is it really? I mean, just because it's been that way for a long time, over a sufficient number of time, anything that can break will, right? So Bitcoin does, make no mistake, Bitcoin does have an end date compared to what it is today. It certainly has an end date altogether. Everything does, but I think I don't think people realize how close that is. And I'm not fudding here. I'll go into a little bit more detail a little later, but I'm starting to take a bit of the more research I do, and I'll actually be putting some publications out on this. The more research that I'm doing, I'm starting to get genuinely concerned, having gone from a Bitcoin maximalist when I started mining versus now I have genuine concerns that are rooted in logic and math. Yeah. Granted, a little bit speculative, but there's still valid concerns. So we'll talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, and speaking on Bitcoin beliefs that are either widely repeated is one of those. Is even if we look at the belief of all sorts of players in the space, whether we're talking Bitcoin maxis to people that are very respected and educated in the space across the board, they've gone from a state of saying, hey, this quantum threat is 10, 20 years out to, okay, hey, maybe we got to take this thing seriously. It's the pendulum is swinging to an extent, and we're seeing it a little bit more and more. We have a couple more on Bitcoin here. I think one question we have here, which is just more so on Joseph, what do you like about quantum resistant ledger? I think this is a good one tied to we're talking on.
Assuming you do, it's a framed question on purpose.
Yeah,
You have to answer within the boundaries of the question.
As a guest, gotta like obviously.
Why is vanilla the best ice
Yeah,
cream?
what
Man.
I think the main thing is like QRL is alongside me probably the two entities that I've been looking at, myself and my research colleagues at Kent and QRL, the people that have been looking at this the longest. There was obviously a few papers that predated that, but this has been something that it feels like almost with both myself and my research and QRL have kind of gone on almost parallel paths for a long while now. But I think that's the thing that impresses me the most is the foresight, the understanding that without sounding like I'm fudding and I'm just but Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, they will never be truly quantum resistant, like absolutely, fully, truly quantum resistant, because there's inevitably going to be artifacts left on the blockchain. So there's going to have to be hard decisions made, whether that's freezing accounts, whether that's removing UTXOs from the UTXO set. QRL will never have that problem, and I think that's that foresight, that understanding, and also the technology itself, using quantum post-quantum cryptography years before NIST standardized it is impressive. And obviously there's on upgrade coming, which is going to be incredibly exciting. Being able to run fully fledged smart contracts and other stuff on that is it's an exciting technology, and that's my what I particularly love about QRL.
Next question: do you think Bitcoin's governance model is a strength or a liability in the next 10 years?
I'm happy to go first on that one. My answer is both, in truth. I think that if you're looking at it from purely the quantum threat side of things, it's potentially a liability. It's difficult to put through upgrades and update the blockchain quickly. And this is the biggest upgrade that they will ever do. Like, there's no mistake about that. Like any other comparison, like this is the biggest upgrade. You are changing your entire cryptographic layer. If they can't do that within 10 years, then they're going to have I think most experts in the field predict that 10 years is probably about the end of the timeline that we're looking at for a CRQC to enter the game, as it were. But on the other side, I do think that the cautiousness and it is a benefit. Like at the end of the day, every other blockchain, I'm not going to say every other blockchain, but most other blockchains have some kind of foundation which sort of lead the charge on that development side of things, can update, can upgrade. Bitcoin doesn't. It is a decentralized collection of developers that, by and large, dedicate their time to maintaining that blockchain, and that's why trust is needed. There's no way of making that element of Bitcoin trustless. So being overly cautious in 90% of cases, I believe, is a positive for Bitcoin. Which obviously means that there is ossification, there is slowness to react to things, there is lengthy debate about just about every question posed. If you follow the Bitcoin mailing list, it's generally well-meaning discussion. But when there is a active risk, where we don't know when the CRQC will exist. Like that I think that's one of the key problems. Like over the next 10 years, we don't know when this is going to happen, and all it takes is a PR news wire that this experiment's been done by IonQ or whoever, and all you have to do is look at it and go, well, that is essentially what a CRQC is. And if Bitcoin isn't ready at that point in time, then I don't think there even needs to be an attack. I think that is a serious problem. And going back to my paper, the 76 days of downtime, I mean, that is the bare minimum. That is using 100% throughput. That is like 100% throughput, unrealistic assumptions. It's more likely going to be close to a year to a year and a half, maybe, to actually upgrade everybody on the Bitcoin network. I mean, there is a lot of assumptions within that, but that's before you decide on a signature scheme, before you decide on what you're going to do with all the UTXOs that don't upgrade before a certain time. It's going to be a long process, and I don't think that for that specific problem, how Bitcoin development works is going to be used.
Yeah, for those, just as a quick note on what Joseph just said, in the show notes, we'll have an easy reference to downtime required for Bitcoin quantum safety. For those of you who haven't seen that prior, if you want to take a glance along with that and everything else we cover. Michael, anything to add on that one in terms of Bitcoin governance as a strength or liability over the next decade?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts. I agree with a lot of Joseph's points. I view Bitcoin's. I didn't always feel this way, but today I view the strength of Bitcoin's governance model in a bit of a bell curve. And the way it started out, it was easy. It would have been easy to attack using multiple CPUs, and then would have been easier to attack. It would have been easy to attack with GPUs. Then it would be easy to attack with ASICs. But as you move forward in the bell curve, more and more the scale of it starts getting so large that it's integrated. It's a relatively simple protocol, right? I mean, it's not overly complex to understand, even if it's a complex topic. And I think there's a point at which the scale makes changes start to become almost impossible. It's notoriously difficult to make changes to Bitcoin because there are so many voices and there's so much disinformation and misinformation with competing agendas, and it's hard to it's difficult to make changes for that reason. So I think its governance model, I actually think we're on the strength of its governance model is on the right hand side of the bell curve, and that's just my opinion. I think it's going to become more and more difficult to make changes, and that becomes a liability because of existential or potentially existential, depending on which camp you're in, to make changes in the future. I also agree with Joseph that I don't think there's a way. I don't. This is going to be contentious, probably a little bit. I see no way out of being able to post migrate Bitcoin without compromising either the ethos and philosophy of Bitcoin or allowing it to be attacked. You have the freeze camp. Okay, so you were talking. I think you mentioned freeze camp, no freeze camp, right? Okay, so for those that don't know what that is, assuming you can get the post-quantum secure DSAs installed. You get everyone on the same page, and well, not everyone. You get a majority on the same page. You come up with the post-quantum secure protocols for DSA, and essentially you make Bitcoin post-quantum secure. But it's not quite post-quantum secure yet, even though people will say it is. You get to the point to where you can do a post-quantum secure transaction, and that's when the real problems start, I think. Just assume that all the code gets put in place. As you start to make post-quantum secure transactions, some of those Bitcoins are secured by legacy transactions susceptible to CRQCs. Some are not. And this creates a value disparity, I think, in that some Bitcoins are no longer worth as much because some could potentially have security attack vectors applied to them. And that attacks the foundation of trust and creates an argument that that Bitcoin becomes less fungible, meaning not all Bitcoin is necessarily worth the same if they're secured under different types of cryptography. So on the freeze camp and no freeze camp, the freeze camp, so all the signatures are in. Bitcoin is post quantum secure. That's the narrative. It won't be, but you'll be able to do a post quantum secure transaction. At that point, you have a few different options. You've got the no freeze camp, which essentially just says, okay, we're not going to lock out old coins. We're not going to lock out Satoshi's paid a public key coins. We're not going to destroy anything. And that's going to preserve the spendability of them. And it's going to preserve the philosophy of Bitcoin, but it's going to be leaving a gaping security hole for those old coins. And that's not good. You have the freeze camp, which means at some point you arbitrarily reach consensus. I don't know if that's even possible arbitrarily. An impartial block height or block number on a specific date, theoretically, and essentially anyone that's not migrated and performed that post-quantum secure transaction gets locked out of the hard fork. Well, that's kind of strange too, because then that brings up really difficult questions about property ownership rights. Did I ever have a Bitcoin? I thought I had a Bitcoin. Wait, what do you mean I'm not in the new fork? And you can argue that that's in Satoshi's white paper that it's going to be deflationary in metric, but people that are unalived, if you will, or have lost their keys are a lot less likely to file lawsuits against whoever, developers or whoever. They're a lot less likely to complain. So if you do the freeze camp, you're essentially attacking the philosophy of ownership, and which compromises trust. And trust is everything when it comes down to blockchain, right? I see one other option: fragmentation. What I think is going to happen is I think you're going to see fragmentation, and I think just like you with Bitcoin Cash, BCH, I think you're going to see separate forks of Bitcoin with different with people with different schools of thought, different philosophies on what blockchain is, how real the CRQC threat is, and you might end up. We've got one major Bitcoin, the original one, which you could argue is BCH or BTC. I don't know. You could easily end up with two or three more. At the end of the day, I don't really see a reasonable way out of this outside of those three options. Something important is going to have to break. And I don't think people realize that. I'll be putting together some content on this as well too. So hopefully that'll be this month. And these are the things that people don't want to talk about. So actually, I'd love to hear Joseph's opinion on because it's a bit contentious.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. I mean, from a security perspective, from purely a security perspective, not the social perspective, you'd always lean towards freezing or even removing those UTXOs from the set, because
you can maintain security and you can cut off the old users.
Absolutely. Yeah. But then obviously when you add in the social side, what Bitcoin actually is, that's a very, very different prospect. But going back to something that we kind of were speaking about a little bit earlier, like around regulation and stuff like that, will Bitcoin even have a choice? Because with ETFs and so on and so forth, would the regulation that comes along with those more TradFi assets, are they going to are the Bitcoin developers, are the community as a whole going to actually have a choice as to whether they can allow it not to be frozen? Because if you end up in a situation where, from a regulation point of view, you are required to keep the network as safe as possible from this new emerging threat, then allowing, because don't get me wrong, like whether you intentionally allow it or not, or it happens as a result of being unprepared, a quantum attacker attacking let's say it's not that entire 33% or whatever the number is of reveal public keys. Let's say it's closer to 10%. Are you really going to allow one individual with a quantum device to take 10% of all Bitcoin? And
are you going to be able to convince your shareholders that the risk does not exist so that they don't pull all their money? And if you do have a fork, does it fork the ETF? Do you have BTC one with a bid ask and BTC two Q with a bid?
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you at the end of what you were saying there.
Okay.
Realistically, in my opinion, and I want to hear if you have the same opinion, is that the true Bitcoin is going to be where the money goes. That's going to be where Saylor, that's going to be where BlackRock, it's where the ETFs go, not where the Bitcoin core devs are necessarily. That's another uncomfortable thing that people, because for a majority of users, it's not about the technology, it's about the money. It's about the value of that wallet.
And for a big portion of them that even say it's about the technology, at the end of the day, it's about the financial part. So, I mean, there's a couple camps, but
this is the thing. Everyone today is focused on the tech, the fork, the digital signature algorithm, and they're worried about the technology. No one is talking about the philosophy and how important that is. I would argue that the trust platform, the trust that Bitcoin was a part of its innovation through partially solving the Byzantine generals problem, right? And that you don't have to trust the recipient, and Bitcoin doesn't care how old you are, how tall you are, how old you are, how tall you are, your race, your religion, your color. It doesn't care about any of that, because trust is fundamental at the core of blockchain's ethos. And if you move forward with post-quantum security, I see no way in which you cannot you have to either break the security or you have to break the trust. And people, this is a really uncomfortable question. And if you distill it down, I'm not going to say absolutely. I'm not going to say absolute. Someone will replay this video in 15 years and say I was wrong or whatever, probably my own kids. And, but essentially what I'm saying is I don't see a win here for Bitcoin. I'm leaning towards that as a most likely outcome. I'm not saying this definitively, but I'm leaning towards something very important breaking or forks. And to answer your question, Joseph, what's the real Bitcoin? That depends on the person. If I were to say BCH, that's a very it's a philosophical question, so I have to give a philosophical answer. I could do that, and I could be. It's arguable I could be considered right. But as far as what the financial institutions go with, yeah, they're going to go with probably where the sailors go, or where the ETFs go, certainly. But how the heck do you get there? What's that migration look like? Bitcoin fork. Okay, Bitcoin fork. All of a sudden, you've got 20% of nodes running a different fork. What the heck happens to the ETFs? This is one of the reasons, as humans, why do we do this to ourselves? This is one of the reasons I was always against ETFs, because you're either on chain or you're off chain. At least that's the way it's supposed to be. Maybe as a species, we're just not capable of self accountability. I don't know.
Yeah, speaking of things that are under discussed, let's go on to this next one, which is what's the most under discussed centralization risk in crypto? Mining, custodians, stable coins. What do you guys? What are each of you guys seeing here? Whoever wants to take this one first. We got couple more questions in the docket.
I can probably take that. I think collaboration among mining pools, pooling together, no pun intended, their hash rates could be a risk. Coercion to core developers through something greater than the hammer attack, threat of imprisonment for, I don't know. But I would say mining pools, core devs, and quantum, but that's not really a centralization risk. But go ahead, Joseph, take a stab at that.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, in truth, I think probably one of the biggest centralization risks is the fact that there are individuals that are just stacking crazy amounts of Bitcoin and show no sign of stopping. I think the actual centralization of where the cryptocurrency is owned is creating a disparity anyway across the network, and maybe that's an opinion born out of jealousy, but it certainly is a risk. Going back to what we were just previously saying, like while technically having more Bitcoin doesn't buy you any more voting power on the network by any stretch, in the real world it does. And I think that's a potential risk. But I do completely agree. Mining centralization is always risky, and it's especially now you're at the point where, I mean, you hear very, very occasionally about these people that mine a block on their own as a solo miner, but that's becoming less and less frequent. Obviously, because of the sheer hash power it takes to actually consistently have a probability of mining a block, and it's not only natural for those mining pools to collaborate together to share that reward. So far as we're aware, there's not been any malicious collaboration, but it is a risk, and I don't know whether it's a risk that could potentially be an issue.
I think one of your points is TradFi as a centralized risk. The ETFs, the off-chain stuff. I bought some Bitcoin because I bought some MSTR, right? The perception risk of people not own. This is starting to sound like gold all over again, isn't it? Right. So I think that's a very valid point. The traditional finance, the integration of the legacy system into what was supposed to be something pure and clean, right, and trustworthy, has now interoperated with, I would argue, a parasitic effect, but
I mean,
it is what it is.
It is one of those things that is absolutely sort of. I don't like. I see it quite a lot cited in papers, and I think I've probably been guilty of it at some point myself. Probably I had a bit more of an excuse back in sort of 2020, pre-ETFs, of making this statement. But Bitcoin has a market valuation of whatever the trillion number is today, 1.5, 2 trillion, whatever it is today. In reality, I don't think anybody knows how big that market is for paper Bitcoin on top, for like how much extra Bitcoin is actually flowing around the TradFi market. Like, and then obviously you can pound on top of that ETFs. That's a not necessarily a recipe for disaster, but it's also the external risk that it isn't just that Bitcoin on the network that's at risk. It's all Bitcoin associated products.
The market's not 21 million. I mean, it's not 21 million yet, but there's only that's one of the, I mean, right there, that's one of the biggest use cases is its scarcity, right? Well, we pretty much did a good job at probably destroying that component of that, that minor system of value, that minor component of Bitcoin, that there'll only ever be 21 million. You could look back and say, you know what, we're human. It was never going to be 21 million. We'll always find a way to wreck something beautiful. But I try not to talk philosophically too much on here. But yeah, I think that's a good point. ETFs, things off chain ownership, if you will, pushes us past what the actual amount is, which affects the market cap, which affects the value and the perception of its value. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have one in here where we'll zoom out from just Bitcoin itself and talk just more on blockchain industry and crypto projects in general. Another question we had in the docket was to you, Joseph, starting out with you, and then Michael and I can jump in on this one. What's the clearest sign that a crypto project is real infrastructure versus just, a token with, marketing or a pig with lipstick on it, so to speak? So there's a lot of, and I think this is a really important one to touch on because, with the, meme coin craze going on and a lot of, there's a lot of excitement going on with AI right now. So I think that a lot of crypto gets bucketed into, there's not really utility there. So how do you differentiate those two buckets between real, real infrastructure and real value and utility versus the just a token with a little marketing and a lipstick on it, so to speak?
I think that firstly, I mean, as long as you're not trying to scam anyone, having a token with no utility, setting up some ERC20 token, if that's what you want to do, then that's perfectly fine. I do think it's now easier than ever to create your own cryptocurrency. It seems that there's more cryptocurrencies than there are people actually like using blockchains at times, but that's a different argument. I'd say normally it's relatively clear. I think if you're trying to do something in a different way that hasn't been done before, there was a phase where it was back in 2018-19, every blockchain was described as an Ethereum killer. Every blockchain was going to be an Ethereum killer that was going to run at 10 million TPS when it had 2 or 3 users. And I think that is one of the biggest indicators, is a dedicated following, not just a hype following, not just a pump and dump following, like actually a maintained community over a period of time that are actually trying to become more knowledgeable. Because at the end of the day, that's all that's all a blockchain is. It's the a blockchain or a cryptocurrency is nothing without any kind of community. But outside of that, as I said, like it's trying to push the boundaries of what we've done already. Bitcoin was an incredible starting place. Ethereum improved upon it. Solana improved to some extent on Ethereum. Like there's projects like the ICP Definity project, really cool, interesting project. And then obviously it comes back to QRL, like actually providing that post quantum resistance, that pushing that cutting edge technology. That to me is what defines a really good project. When you combine that community aspect with the pushing the boundaries of what's possible in this space, and I don't think that's done often enough. It's almost always seen as pure profit. How do we make profit? How do we shill our token to the moon or whatever? And at the core of it, the whole of cryptocurrencies and blockchain, it's about the technology. It's like I mean, that's why I'm in. That's why I do what I do, because I'm interested in the technology rather than making a profit. Obviously,
you're here for the tech.
Yeah, exactly.
That good answer. Anything to add to that one?
Yeah,
I think I have similar.
I'm going to agree. Well. I'm going to agree with all that, and I'm not going to talk about, is the team doxed? Do they have a real chain? Do they have blah 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 blah? I'm not. Don't even want to talk about if it has real utilitarian value. I'm going to propose a thought experiment. The thought experiment is to take all of the descriptions of the altcoins, not all of them, just go through Twitter or whatever, and just take the descriptions of the coins, dump them into ChatGPT, and have ChatGPT sort out the deltas of what these coins are. And I suspect if you were to do something like this, you'll find a lot of synonyms and creative wording structure, in that they're all kind of really just doing the same thing and describing it differently. And I get this impression quite a bit. When I'm talking to other projects, it's like, okay, that's creative. That sounds different, but is it really different? And here's one of the things I like about QRL. I don't have to come up with creative synonyms or creative writing in order to manufacture synthetic deltas of why our project is different. That's one of the things I love most about this project.
Yeah, we have 2 more I'd like to get to. The next one, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Joseph, you talked on what you liked about the quantum resistant ledger. Michael, you added to some thoughts on that. I think a good question just for both of you to touch on a little bit would be on, if you had to design a brand new layer 1 today from scratch, what would you keep from Bitcoin and what would you change immediately? I know this answer could be our discussion in and of itself, but from a somewhat high level with a little bit of nuanced answer, what's your guys'
I'll take this one.
take on this one?
Move to the Bahamas, post-quantum secure since the first block, privacy chain, anonymous, and complete anonymity.
So not realistic, but sounds ideal if it's
is it? No, it's probably not real that realistic. Joseph, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah,
you take this one.
I think one of the things that I admire a lot about Bitcoin is, like, as we've said earlier, like it's not now the most impressive tech on like it's not the most impressive blockchain. It is what it is. It's an inherent store of value. You can't run complex smart contracts. You can't deploy apps on chain. You can't do any of that stuff. It is what it is. It's incredibly simple. But it's the fact that it's been built to this behemoth that it is today. This absolute apparently unstoppable juggernaut of like that's completely changed how finance works. Like it started a complete financial revolution. When you look at, like, without Bitcoin, we wouldn't have USDC being used by Shopify and all sorts of other companies. You wouldn't have any other blockchains. I mean, you can make assumptions that someone at some point might have come up with a similar idea. It's that community that it's built. It's how it's been built slowly, not with like flashy marketing. It was built on the technology, and it flourished firstly because it was first mover, but secondly because the technology at the time was actually cutting edge. And I respect that sort of, like, the whole decentralization attitude first aspect to Bitcoin. How a community can really, like, develop something so now integral to a lot. I mean, I think we, like, talk about it a lot, but if Bitcoin didn't upgrade to post-quantum, it would be devastating across the board for, like, no matter whether you're what area you're in, you would feel it. It's now in pension pots and so on and so forth. And it's just that's the part I find absolutely incredible, is that it's been created from this one guy or one person, as far as we're aware, running this project, talking about it on a mailing list, getting a few other people involved, and it's now what it is. On the other side of things, the one thing I certainly wouldn't keep is ECDSA. And that's relatively straightforward, I think. I think that's, if I was starting that from scratch, it'd be that community building aspect, but I would also use MLDSA.
Yeah. So coming from that post quantum from day one, from the very beginning.
I think that's, and the thing is, it's one of these things that you can't sit there and blame them. Really, like, you can't sit there. I mean, it's
always easy to look in hindsight.
Exactly.
And 100 other things could have gone wrong as well. We're just kind of at this point in 2026, we're really looking at, hey, what does the future have in store?
Is it equally hard to not take credit for the forward thinking when everyone else told you no along the way? I don't know. I'm going to add one thing to what you were saying about Bitcoin and its value. You'll see a lot of posts on Twitter, crypto Twitter. Bitcoin has no intrinsic value, is it? Which I think is a ridiculous statement. But now, get here in 2026, I'm going to offer a hypothesis that they might be right, but for the wrong reason. So when people say when people say Bitcoin has no intrinsic value, I would argue that trust is an intrinsic value. You trust the math. You're all following the same math, and that intrinsically has value because it's not falsifiable, right? You can't, math is universal. But at the same time, that's where the quantum threat comes in that, can you trust the cryptographic math anymore? And to my earlier point, we're reaching the point to where that's becoming not just speculative, but more existential. So everyone out there that says Bitcoin has no intrinsic value, I might start to agree with you, but just not for the reasons that you think.
Yeah. Michael, do you want to jump into this last question you have here? You can read it out on the next major collapse kind of question. You
Sure.
want to touch on that one, and then I'll wrap us up from there if you want to read this one out in full.
What do you think is the most likely way the next major crypto collapse happens? Not price. I guess it depends on what type of collapse. Confidence collapse, technology collapse, mine hash rate collapse. Go, Joseph.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the perspective of, like, for example, hash rate, I think Bitcoin, for example, is relatively secure on that front. I think it would take a massive decrease in the amount of miners. I can't foresee that. I've actually written papers on how quantum computing will improve mining, and actually increase the hash rate, and actually improve the security of mining and potentially profitability. But I think one of the potential things is Bitcoin was born out of lack of regulation of banks, to some extent. I mean, we can only hypothesize about what the original reasoning was, whether it was just a project. But the inscription into the first block is relatively telling of the creator's mindset. Over-regulation could be a major hurdle into the future. It's I can't remember the exact quote. Once you give away some liberty, you forfeit all of it, or something along those lines.
To be complicit is to endorse something along that.
Yeah, and while some regulation can benefit in the short term, I could foresee over-regulation becoming a potential major issue. Obviously, with my line of work, quantum computing is potentially a major threat, for a multitude of reasons, both to the wider ecosystem, not just the layer one itself, not just the layer ones themselves. I do believe, but I think this brings me to what I believe is going to be the biggest threat. Is, do I believe Bitcoin will upgrade? Probably in some capacity. Ethereum, I bet that it probably will do. Solana, yes. Ripple, yes. But when you start going down to some of these smaller blockchains that have still got intrinsic they still have value behind them, valuable enough that it's profitable for some malicious person with a quantum computer to attack, they're at risk. I believe that will cause a collapse in some of the layer ones, and potentially even layer twos, that don't upgrade. And that could cause potentially a major, not necessarily a thinning out, but cause a lot of some of these cryptocurrencies to become unviable into the future. Whether that's because the creators are no longer interested in upkeeping it, which could be a potential, or alternatively because there isn't the knowledge. And I think that's going to be something that's major. Like, MLDSA, Sphinx Plus, Falcon, even like Falcon, they're a lot more complicated. And I think Falcon is one of the ones that I would worry about. Like, implementation of Falcon is hard. It is very, very hard, and a mistake could cause a blockchain to be vulnerable, for example. But also the lack of knowledge in this area. So I think that's that's a potential thing that could cause the next collapse.
Michael, jump in here, and then I have one closeout question for Joseph as we wrap this one up.
I'm going to keep this pretty simple. I agree with Joseph that regulation is a concern. I also, when something's a concern, there's usually a beneficiary and a cost to someone. I wonder. It depends on which side of the coin you're on, and whether or not you'd consider it a concern or not. You know, if you're the Fed, you might have a different opinion. So, but at the end, I think consensus fracture is probably my largest concern right now. Right now, we can't decide whether or not to make Bitcoin more like Ethereum or not. That's one of the bips that's been floating around that has the community split. Personally, don't add any more complexity into what is already running, unless you want to complicate it into obscurity. But there's altcoins for that. But there's a lot of question. There's bit proposals out there and a lot of talk. Hey, Bitcoin, let's make it do this. Let's make it do this. Let's make it do this. I personally don't believe it was made to do everything. It was just supposed to be something simple. And if you start to complicate it, it's going to be difficult to describe what it is. But I think moving forward, I'm just using that as an example. I think consensus and getting people to agree or disagree is going to be very more difficult moving forward. And I think that is also going to tie into the the quantum threat as well. Essentially, just having everything brought to a halt because nobody can reach consensus on exactly what to do or how to do it or when to do it, things like that. And it's going to take it's going to take five. If they decided now on how to do it, it'd take 5 to 10 years probably for Bitcoin to be probably post quantum secure, and the old ESAs, if you're in the freeze camp, the old ESAs deprecated. 10 years from now, I mean, if you look at the progress of cryptography or quantum computers, this is logarithmic progress. This isn't just this isn't a straight line. So that's why we're here. But that's why we're here talking about this.
Yeah,
that's all I got.
Yeah, no, thanks for closing that one out, Strike. Joseph, one more question. I think that would be beneficial for the viewers that have been with us as a closing out question. I think we're definitely, based on this conversation, there's a lot of different areas that we've touched on today that we could delve into. So I think an upcoming, next round of this would be beneficial all around if we're able to do that. So I think one good closing question, we've talked on the Bitcoin a bit. We've talked on post-quantum cryptography a bit. Viewers might be in different stages. We might have people that are very understanding on the technology. Some people might just be involved on the retail side and maybe don't have as much of a technical understanding. And they're probably, most everyone viewing this, except a couple, might not be as privy as you on being a post-quantum cryptography expert. So in terms of next action items or what you would recommend viewers do between now and our next episode, what are maybe a resource or two or three, along with what we've already mentioned, that you think would be useful for people to go down a rabbit hole on, or maybe just research a little bit more or look into? That's maybe is not as much of a barrier, but makes them feel like they can kind of start to chew on this big elephant that's in the room a little bit more. What would you recommend?
So I think the first one I'd recommend is actually a report that was written by Citibank at the beginning of this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was released on 1st of January, actually.
Do you know the title of that one?
I don't. Do you want me to just grab that quickly?
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll Joseph we'll have that in the show notes for our viewers. But carry on to the next one, Joseph. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm not going to tout my own papers, but the original Bitcoin vulnerability to quantum attack is a great read. Really, really well laid out paper. Still relevant today. And outside of that, I'd recommend there's several big players in the field. I'd recommend maybe following some of the IBM quantum learning accounts on X, or even people that are associated in the cryptocurrency space, looking at quantum computing, such as the QRL X accounts, or even people like Nick Carter or Project 11. A lot of discussion now goes on Twitter rather than academic papers where I started. It's a lot more on Twitter and in reports by major companies. But yeah, that's what I recommend.
Perfect. Well, we'll include a number of those links below in the show notes, so it's easy reference. Along with those, just probably Googling some of those queries, they'll pop up for you. But As always, appreciate having a conversation with you in this more public format. As mentioned a minute ago, we'll likely have another one coming up soon, and we've just been enjoying where the space is going. There's a lot to be excited about, and we really appreciate you as an expert in the field specific to post quantum and cryptography joining Michael and I and informing our audience on an area that I think a lot of people are excited about. So for those viewing, we appreciate you joining us, taking the time. And until the next episode, keep those digital assets post-quantum secure. We'll see you guys later. Thank you.
Cheers.